Hey there, kiddos, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Uncle Frank, but that you are having a great day. And in today's video, I'm going to be sitting back in my very squeaky chair, relaxing and having a little conversation with all of you guys about Dungeons and Dragons and its tumultuous future. You see, the Gen Con has come, and with it comes a bunch of announcements for a bunch of games and properties in the tabletop gaming space. A bunch of RPGs have big announcements coming up, and Dungeons and Dragons is definitely one of them. And amongst other really interesting announcements, such as the return of the Dark Sun setting for Dungeons and Dragons, which is genuinely pretty interesting insofar as I'm concerned. There's also, well, I'm just going to have to rip the Band-Aid off, aren't I? There's also the announcement that Universes Beyond is coming to Dungeons and Dragons. That's right. Moving forward, Dungeons and Dragons is no longer just going to be the worlds of D&D as laid out for, well, 50 plus years now, I think. No, it is now going to be a rule set that is going to be licensed out in order to bring other franchises into the tabletop RPG world using the D&D rules set, much like what Magic the Gathering has turned into. And we all know how well that's turned out. But to avoid being a complete Debbie Downer, I am going to go over my best attempt at completely unbiased pros and cons for the future announcements of Universes Beyond. And keep in mind, we know very little about what shape this Universes Beyond will take moving forward. All we know right now is that it is happening. World of Warcraft is the first one, apparently, and then following up will be Star Wars, which is an interesting choice, but hey, it is what it is. So, first things first, I want to talk about some of the good that this can do for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, remember, D&D has had a very hectic last decade. It has seen an explosive rise, thanks in no small part to online D&D playthroughs, popularized by things like Critical Role, which have no doubt brought in fans. Oh, also there was Stranger Things. Yes, I forgot about that one. These brought in fans, and they made Dungeons and Dragons extremely popular in nerd culture and in broader pop culture. Made it trendy to play, in fact. And then it's also had some abysmal lows, including a bunch of people leaving D&D rather aggressively, thanks to the OSR nonsense, the shift to D&D 5.5 being not the best received, and some other interesting choices, especially when it came to how the anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons treated its founders. So, needless to say, D&D has not been in a perfect place in the last decade, especially not in the last 3 years. And it's not, I don't want to say it's dying, obviously, but it doesn't look like it was projected to go forward explosively in terms of player growth. And part of that is you only need to buy one book for D&D, right? Your players are locked in once a group has one book. They have the core rules, maybe a few side books that they want to get for extra rules or classes or whatever, and that's kind of it. So the first thing that this can really do to help liven the scene up is Universes Beyond can be an excellent source of revenue. It can be profitable. In fact, we know it's profitable because we've seen it be profitable time and time again with Magic the Gathering's Universes Beyond. Sure, not every Universes Beyond set for Magic has been a slam dunk, absolute home run out of the park, or whatever sports term I feel like using today. I don't play sports, in case you guys couldn't tell. Hole in one? Yeah, something like that. Not every Universes Beyond set has been a banger, but most of them, for the most part, have had pretty good success, especially on the secondary market after release. Yes, there's still the Spider-Mans. They're still the TMNTs, but for the most part, they are received fairly well. And more importantly, for Wizards of the Coast's position here, they are profitable. And obviously, some of that profit will be seen in Dungeons and Dragons as it goes to point number 2. It brings you more players. Obviously, we have seen that the biggest draw for Universes Beyond with regards to Magic the Gathering is it brings in fans of other IPs, other franchises, other brands, and gets them to try out Magic the Gathering. Not all of them stick around. In fact, from what I've seen personally and online, most of them don't stick around, but a few do. And that's player growth, that's retention. Sure, it's not perfect, but it is growth, and Wizards likes to see that, especially when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons. Because, hey, if you can get people subscribed to that D&D digital platform, it's pretty great. So it's profitable. It brings in new players. The other thing I should mention is that it's not exactly new. You know, Dungeons and Dragons is no stranger to crossovers. They've done a bunch of Magic the Gathering crossovers a few years ago, Ravnica, Strixhaven, etc. And way back in the day, they even did this Diablo 2 source book. And yes, I am just bringing this book out so I have a chance to talk about the D&D Diablo 2 source book, because when the hell am I going to talk about this thing ever again? But it's not like they are completely alien to the idea of doing crossovers and doing other franchises in the D&D rule set. In fact, a huge draw of the D20 OSR rule set that was made available to basically anybody to use was that you could shove any franchise into the modern D20 rule set, so you could basically play Dungeons and Dragons with any campaign, any concept, any brand you liked. So it's not exactly like playing Star Wars with a D20 system is alien to people, or Lord of the Rings. And I should have brought the Lord of the Rings book over now that I think about it. Oh well. Oh well, this is what it is. I'm not a genius. You know, it's not like these other brands and these other IPs are completely alien to the world of tabletop RPGs. They've been done before, and now there's just the opportunity to do them within the D&D product umbrella. The final thing that I want to mention, and perhaps the most exciting, honestly, if this is done right, this has the potential to be the best part about this, and that is there are way more campaign and story opportunities when branching out with Universes Beyond properties. And by that I mean campaign books and adventure modules are pretty core to Dungeons and Dragons. You know, not every single game master is going to have the opportunity and the time to whip up their own world and their own adventure. A lot of them will just run players through a pre-generated adventure, a pre-generated campaign. And something that Universes Beyond can bring to the table is a D&D run-through of famous stories from other IPs. Star Wars is the big one that comes up to me. You know, Star Wars has some extremely famous stories. All right, the classic OG trilogy, okay, is one of the most beloved stories in all of fiction, period, right? Could you imagine a 3-part campaign book trilogy where the players are taking the role of characters in that original trilogy and going through the emotions of that adventure? That has the potential to be really fucking amazing. All things considered, taking all biases out of the equation, if done right, reimagining some classic stories from other franchises within the scope of D&D can be really cool. And there's plenty of IPs out there. I mentioned Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings has plenty of cool stories that you could bring over to Dungeons and Dragons. Now, it's not perfect. Not every single mechanic and rule set and opportunity out there is necessarily going to fit. Going back to the Star Wars example, obviously, the Force as a mechanic, as something tied to the Star Wars universe, has always been kind of notoriously difficult to properly mechanically tie up in an RPG. But I'm confident that with the right passionate creator who knows what they're doing, they could, in theory, create some of the greatest campaign books ever. You know, just look at Name a classic franchise with a cool, good story. Imagine the old Conan movies, for instance, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Could you imagine a D&D adventure where you're just some guys going with Conan to go on that grand adventure? I know that there was some old Conan and Red Sonja D&D modules back in the day, but I'm talking about like a modern re-envisioning of that old movie and stuff. That could be really cool. Or like, I don't know, what's another classic fantasy film that I've wanted to. I have not rewatched a lot of them now that I think about it. Call, Beastmaster. There's a lot of cool ones. But moving on, obviously there's mechanical issues, but those aren't the problems that I think could arise. I've talked about some good things, some potential really good stuff it could bring to the table, but there is a reason that Universes Beyond is so contentious. People like myself very much do not like it for one major reason, like what we've already seen happen with Magic the Gathering, and that is the loss of identity. It is no big mystery right now that Magic the Gathering has an identity crisis. It's very difficult, as someone who's followed the lore for years, it's very difficult to even tell you what the actual main story of Magic the Gathering is right now. Because so much of the game is tied up with this Universes Beyond stuff, intermingled occasionally with little snippets of lore for the actual Magic setting. There is very much a real threat that, going forward, Dungeons and Dragons could experience what Magic did, where it's getting more and more Universes Beyond releases and fewer actual Dungeons and Dragons releases. And fewer Dungeons and Dragons players know anything or have any idea what the actual D&D world is about. Which, to be fair, is less of a problem with D&D, in my opinion. Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, the World of Darkness books, in my opinion, RPG rule sets are not necessarily intermingled and married to their settings. I use Pathfinder for homebrew campaigns and adventures all the time, and I know that a lot of Dungeons and Dragons players do as well. You can definitely divorce. There we go. Jesus. You can divorce the rule set from the setting, and I think that is I think that's a boon for D&D that Magic doesn't have. With Magic the Gathering, for instance, there's no opportunity in Magic. Okay, none. For you to say, I just want to play with Magic the Gathering characters and themes and cards, right? Someone at your table wants to play Universes Beyond, you can't stop them. But with D&D, to counteract this first con, loss of identity is less of an issue. Because your game master can put their foot down and say, no, this is an adventure that takes place in Star Wars. Or this is an adventure that takes place in World of Warcraft. Or this is an adventure that takes place in the Shire. Or this is an adventure that takes place in the Forgotten Realms. The game master, working together with the players, can very easily curate the setting, the lore, the vibe of the game, which is a real big advantage that Magic the Gathering does not have. So while there is definitely still a potential of Universes Beyond releases overwhelming and overpowering standard Dungeons and Dragons releases, in my opinion, it is not as damaging to the identity of the game as it was with Magic. Moving on to the next con, and that is the licensing issue. I feel like I should have probably mentioned this one first now that I think about it. Licenses expire. I know, shocking, right? Licenses expire, and not every crossover is going to last forever. And with Dungeons and Dragons moving more and more into the exclusively digital space, trying to get more and more of its players to sign up to D&D Online and all that jazz, or D&D Next, or whatever the hell they call that, whatever they call the online hub where they want everyone to play their games through, D&D Beyond, something like that, some stupid name. With more and more people pushed onto digital gaming for Dungeons and Dragons, expired licenses have a real risk of removing the ability to play with the content you paid for. We've already seen this happen with Sony, where Sony recently removed a fuckload of movies and TV shows from their streaming platforms. People paid for those. People owned those. but the licenses expired and Sony just sweeping took all of them off their platforms. You can't watch them anymore. We've seen it happen with video games, where video games are completely removed from digital storefronts that you paid for. You can't play them anymore. Okay? This is awful. And it will happen sooner or later with the digital versions of these crossover books, where sooner or later Wizards of the Coast will motorcycles live and by. Slowly, but surely. Wizards of the Coast sooner or later will lose the license to Star Wars, to World of Warcraft, to Gundam, the Dungeons and Dragons crossover set, right? Sooner or later they'll lose those licenses, and I think there's a very real chance that when those licenses expire, you won't be able to use that content on D&D Next or whatever ever again. Now, just like the first con, this one also has a counterbalance. Most D&D content has, say it with me now, physical media. To my understanding, and so at least I'm pretty sure this is still the case, all D&D content still has physical books for it, which is great. Which means if you are a fan of the Star Wars expansion or the Gundam expansion or the WoW expansion, whatever have you, you can just buy the physical book. Sure, maybe it's months, years after release, and you have to pay a premium on the secondary market, but the opportunity is still there. So this is not as large of a danger for D&D as it is for Sony, for instance. Just putting that out there. So that's two cons out of the way. Both of them are not as bad as they could be. The final two, however, are ones that are a bit more nebulous. Yeah, let's say that. The big one, of course, is that Universes Beyond chases away players. It chases away core audiences. We've seen this with Magic. I basically no longer play Magic, for instance, and I'm someone who would consider themselves a core Magic player for quite a while, actually. I basically no longer play Magic, and I know plenty of other people who have stopped playing because of Universes Beyond largely. Now, this is, again, not the biggest concern if you can replace those players, those leaving audience members with new people who are fans of the new brands. All's well and good, right? But I do believe that with everything else said and done, there's less care that needs to be done when it comes to D&D. After all, if you bought a bunch of D&D books at full price, mind you, it doesn't really matter if you don't play anymore. Wizards already got your money. If you stop playing Dungeons and Dragons because of a WoW expansion, Wizards of the Coast doesn't care. They're never going to care. So this is not a big worry to them, as long as the new players coming in are good enough to replace the players leaving, or migrating to another game, I should say. And of course, the final one is rules bloat. Every new brand is going to have its own new classes, its own new mechanics, its own new races that are going to have to be mechanically represented in the D&D expansion books. And this can lead to a lot of bloat. Some of it good and some of it hard to work with. Like I said before, the Force for Star Wars is mechanically awful to work with, to design around, period. And there's going to be a lot of different franchises that will have really either vague mechanics that will be hard to quantify within the setting of Dungeons and Dragons, like how magic works in the Tolkien mythos, okay? Magic is much more woo rather than the hard-coded Vancian magic that D&D uses. Magic in Tolkien's world and Lord of the Rings feels more mythical, more out there, where it's hard to see a direct connection between A and B, right? Characters rarely cast magic spells and use up a spell slot. They don't do that in Lord of the Rings, but they do in Dungeons and Dragons. And I think that can result in some settings being easily translated to D&D, and others not so easily being translated to D&D. Just so we're clear. And then the final thing I want to say in regards to this announcement is that I think this all but confirms we're getting a WoW expansion and a Star Wars expansion for Magic the Gathering at some point in the future. And if you're a WoW fan, you're probably pretty excited about that, all things considered. I don't know about Star Wars fans. I don't know if there's any of those guys left after the damage that the sequel trilogy and Star Wars Unlimited did to the brand. In all seriousness, though, I am more positive I'm more positive about Universes Beyond for Dungeons and Dragons than I am for Universes Beyond in Magic the Gathering. Part of it is because I firmly believe D&D as a game can handle it better than Magic the Gathering could as a game. Okay? Those are my opinions. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I feel like this rant has gone on for too long, but as always, please like, share, subscribe. Check out the Discord, Patreon, TCG Player, and eBay links. All of those are in the description. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.